Hello, everyone. It's Lionel Sander from Pembroke Publishing, and thanks for joining us this evening for our session. Just before we do get started, though, I would like you to know Pembroke Publishers' head office is situated upon traditional territories of the Wendat, the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Mississaugas of Scugog, Iowa First Nation, Alderville First Nation, and the Métis Nation. The treaty covering this area land in Toronto, Ontario is collectively known as the Williams Treaties of 1923. And I wish to recognize the significant contributions of Indigenous peoples across this land, seeking a new relationship with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, one based in honor and deep respect. And as we come to the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation on September 30th, our first national holiday for this country, I hope you join me and many others as we spend that day reflecting on what the truth is around our Canadian history. I was in a webinar a while ago, and Dr. Pam Toulouse from Laurentian University talked about do what compels you. And she was saying that, someone had asked her in the webinar, how do I find the truth? How do I move forward on my journey in understanding reconciliation? And her comment was, do what compels you. And I really, really took that to heart. And so I will be compelled to learn on the 30th. So with that, it's my honor to introduce our first presenter today, Larry Swartz, in our webinar, Deepening in-Class and Online Learning. Larry, I was thinking, I think I've said this before, but you're a COVID colleague is the best way that I can describe it. I didn't know of you before, and when the webinar started, I got to know you, and now we've done, I think, 5, 6, or 7 of these, and each one of them, I learn a little bit more about your passion around children's literature, around teaching, around anything to do with reading. And in the beginning, I sort of had your bio that I read, and now I get to just talk a little bit, and I even get a smile once in a while when I say something nice. But it's all nice, and so it's a pleasure to have you here this evening, Larry. I know your activities reverberate across the country, with teachers, with people interested in children's literature, and it is an honor to be your host this evening. So I'll happily pass over the virtual mic to you, and I'll come back in at the end just to bring forward any questions that we have. So thank you.
Thank you. Lionel, in your presentation, you were freezing a little bit in and out, but I know you'll solve that. Don't you just love technology? Which is a perfect segue into our little chat today. The book is called Deepening in-Class and Online Learning. And when I tell people about that book, they get either very excited because, wow, do we need that book? And they also get a little bit perplexed. Well, how is it different? So our little chat today is going to walk you through this book. My co-authors, Debbie Nyman and Magdalin Livingston, will also present. And if you can see the cover on the screen, which I think you can, there's a grid there. And if you look carefully, you can see my picture. If you look very closely, they put my picture on the cover. And not to perplex you or puzzle you, but I'm the little teddy bear in the corner there. So I'm not one of the kids that are smiling, but that was just the designer who had a teddy bear. And I said, oh, my goodness, you do have my picture. So this book has been a journey. Now, when you think of any publication, it goes from draft copy to editorial revisions. And this is a book in particular, if you think back, like when we as authors think back of how it began and where it is now in October 2021. It's about to be released any moment, and we're very excited about that. But when we first started this book, particularly Debbie and myself, we came to it, and the word, we can be honest, the word online wasn't even in the title, because we were taking some of our best practices that we believed in from our arts-based teaching, from our literacy teaching, from our inclusion classrooms, But then COVID happened, and I had a lovely lunch with my friend Mary, the brilliant publisher, and we had to recognize the need of what was happening in the world of teaching. What do teachers need? And I said, Mary, they need this book now. Well, I'm good, but I'm not that book. I couldn't publish a book in 6 weeks, but it did go through that evolution, and that's been exciting. So we started with very limited virtual at the time, and then it became, sort of a combination of how can we do face-to-face practices and put them in online. Well, what if online? Who knows what was going to happen if you think back a few months, whether we were going to stop the virtual teaching and go back to face-to-face. Do we cancel the cover, cancel the book? And so it did go through an evolution. And thanks to Mary's brilliance, she pushed us forward to look at what was happening in the world. There has always been online teaching. There's always been virtual teaching in the world of, certainly in my university experiences. And the secondary schools were thrusting to go there as well. But look what happened in the world. And people who are listening today, where were you on this journey? How tense were you when you had to move to virtual, and the flexibility that you had to put up with, and the professional learning and the resources? Wow, what a learning curve for many people, as it would have been for me. But putting that into print, into activities, was a learning curve for us. And where we are in September 2021 was different than we were in September 2020 when this book was going through development. But we're really excited. And thank you for, it's a book for now. And it's intentional that it's both in class and online learning. And we hope to make that evident. But it's certainly much part of the virtual world. I teach at university. I teach at OISE. I teach literacy courses, the children's literature course. I'm teaching a course on play and inclusion now. And I also am responsible for teaching a course called Drama and Dance to my BTA students. Well, you've got to come to my class to see how Larry teaches dance virtually to 30 students on a Wednesday morning. But we've had successes. So it was a learning curve for me, and I still believe in that active participation. For those of you who have my website, Dr. Larry Recommends, my banner is Active Joyful Learning, something that I believe in, my mantra for teaching. And what's your banner on your classroom door? But we wanted to bring that into the experiences of this book, Deepening in-Class Learning. So that's where my world, and I'm going to chat a little bit tonight about things that I'm using and have worked really successful with adults, and how they can be adapted for different grade levels. That's the intention of this resource. So Lionel, we're going to move into the slides, and you're going to control those for us.
You bet.
Okay, there's the cover, which you've all seen now, I've been staring at. And the next slide is our, we work really, I love having lunch with my friend Mary, the publisher, and I can't tell, and negotiations with Debbie and Magdalin for a subtitle. So we have 6 step-by-step strategies. At one point it was 50, at one point it was 70. So we did have to be cognizant of length, but we've narrowed it down to 60 step-by-step strategies. And when we say step-by-step, the instructions are very clear. But we put those words in red in the slide because our intention always is building interaction. How can we invite the kids to interact with us, to interact with each other, to interact with the screen? But I'm always interested, no matter whether I'm sitting in a circle with the students, about how the kids can share their ideas with each other. So interaction is a strong word, and we can't, in these days of teaching, not look at inclusion. Some of you have met my other book, Teaching Tough Topics, but it is how we to address that. We want to include everybody on the screen. Oh, a tiny story. I was teaching a course called Inclusion last spring, and one of the students says, Larry, I don't want to speak out ever. Can you just, I'm only going to go on mute for the 12 weeks of the course. And I said, this is a course called Inclusion, and my job is to ensure that all students are included. The question of to mute to or to unmute is something we're going to raise in our little chat today. But how do we know that all kids are participating and or involved? And they don't always have to speak out. That's not my challenge or my judgment. But how do I know that they are involved, and how do I know they're being included in the content and the strategies that I'm presenting? And imagination is part of our world. You're not going to have a book by Larry and Debbie that doesn't have the arts and the imaginative experience. So hopefully the activities spark imagination and put those three together, and that seems to be the framework for the book. Then next, Lionel. We've been very lucky. One thing we did is what we chose to do is we put throughout the book quotes by our mentor and colleague David Booth, and each chapter is introduced by a quote, and this one introduces the book. And I think it resonates for where teachers were, because each teacher has a personal journey over time. And it's self-assessing, we're wondering, we're observing, we're exploring the myriad of resources devoted to teacher development. Now, David wrote that quote, or put that in his book, What is a Good Teacher, a half a dozen years or so ago, and here it resonates absolutely for what we believe in, and it moves us into our journey. So David is on our shoulders as we present some of our ideas today. Next. Another quote, I was gathering a lot of quotes about inclusion. If you want to teach people a new way of thinking, don't bother trying to teach them. Instead, give them a tool, the use of which will lead to new ways of thinking. And what a tool we have with online virtual teaching. So that resonated with me as well. And we chose that up front to introduce the book. And one more quote is not new for you, but it certainly is the mantra of what's happening in teaching. Lionel, the next one. Teachers can teach virtually anything. Everybody who's a teacher in a classroom now or has been in the last 18 months, you need that t-shirt. Oh my goodness, I support you. I heard from my nieces and my students. I did supervision of year 1 and year 2 students in their practicum teaching, and teachers can teach virtually anything, and they can teach virtually. So get the t-shirt, because I believe strongly in that. So the question about virtual teaching, is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? What are the challenges? What are the strengths? We can get into groups, and we can have you're welcome to put your own thoughts and your own experiences. But we talked to teachers along the way as they were going through this journey, as we were trying to find out their own assumptions. And it does have its strengths and weaknesses. And if we had an activity to put a column for all the challenges and put a column for all the weaknesses, we can guess which one would be stronger. But I'm going to introduce Magdalin Livingston, one of the co-authors of this book. Very briefly, one thing about Magdalin, she's an OISE graduate, a recent OISE graduate from the teacher education program. So she came through that world very recently, but very authentically. And speaking of authentically, she is going through supply teaching experiences, both virtual and face-to-face. I asked her before we came on, what'd you do today? A virtual art lesson. And the other thing is she gave us a great perspective and support for the virtual technology that we needed to filter throughout. So Magdalin, can you help us look at the benefits and challenges?
I sure can. Lionel, if we can go to the next slide. And before I dive in, I do just want to thank the Pembroke team, and of course, thank Larry and Debbie for all of your hard work on this book, and Lionel for hosting the webinar, especially under the circumstances of caring for someone. And I'd also like to thank the audience for being here and for listening. And so before I talk about challenges specifically, if anyone has done any virtual teaching over the last year and a half, I'd like to invite you to write in the chat one, could be small, opportunity that virtual teaching has brought you. It could be that sharing resources amongst your colleagues is a little bit easier with, digital access. It could be, and over the last year of supply teaching, I was in a lot of classrooms where guest speakers were brought in from all over the country, even sometimes outside of the country, into classrooms. People were signing up for so many awesome, amazing workshops that might not have been possible if it were a physical classroom space. And for me, I know this doesn't really apply anymore, but when we were teaching from home virtually, my small opportunity was that I could make myself a cup of coffee in the morning instead of having to go out and buy copious amounts of coffee on my way to work. So I hope you can think of one small opportunity that virtual teaching has brought you. And if you feel like sharing, feel free to do so in the chat. But we can go ahead and dive into some of these challenges. So let's talk tech. There are so many apps, so many platforms, so many digital tools to choose from. And it's very easy to get overwhelmed with everything that's out there. But all the more reason to get the book because there's a great glossary in there with a list of digital apps and tools. And it's a great starting point for building your digital app toolkit, so to speak. We would advise that you start simple, start with what you know. And as you get more and more comfortable, more knowledgeable, reach out to your colleagues and talk about what you use, how you use it, what works for you, and begin to build that variety in your digital toolkit that best serves you and your students, right? But if talking tech still scares you, maybe you can find some comfort in knowing it's not all about the fanciest technology. It's not about being an expert on the latest app. When we talk about inspiring to learn, it is very much that interaction piece that Larry had brought up. So there's a local newspaper in my area where I live that just recently published a small piece on student voices in the area. And there was a grade 8 student that was quoted saying their teacher just constantly lectures them in virtual school and how that impacts their mental health negatively, right? So it's easy to fall into that trap of just wanting to talk, right? Because you're just sitting in front of a screen, kind of like I am right now. But that interaction piece doesn't just fulfill a social need, as I'm sure all of us know, but our learning needs as well. So whichever platform you're using, whether it's Zoom, Google Meet, it's important to build in that time for active participation from your students. And each of the strategies in this book prioritizes and helps support that participation, student participation, and lends itself to building the kind of caring, inclusive communities that we want in our classrooms. Which brings us to the big question, to mute or not to mute. And so now I want you to forget everything I just said about interaction and inclusivity, because now you're probably reliving a memory where you logged onto virtual school in the morning, you asked your students one simple question, and then all of them decide to turn on their microphones on, and you're hit with 30 voices, 10 families in the background, mysterious noises. Are they pets? You're not sure. And it's just easier to mute it all, right? I'm kind of just playing around, but to mute or not to mute can be challenging to think through, of course. On the one hand, student excitement, great. Student engagement, fantastic. And just like the physical classroom, these would be perfect opportunities to reason with students, when they're excited, when they're engaged, and when other stuff is being said. Those are perfect opportunities to reason with students about how we can all be heard and participate in a fair and constructive way. So a simple example of how you can do this in your virtual classroom, I'm sure we've had experience with this, is using those raised hand buttons, the little hand icon, or asking your students to put their questions in the chat, using other emojis that are on Zoom or Google Meet to communicate while presenting. And you can also build in time for free-flowing conversation when it's appropriate and generative, and when they understand that the goal is, or the fundamental understanding is that everyone deserves to be heard. Right? And breakout rooms are excellent for this. And a lot of the strategies in the book are great for breakout room activities. So So far, I've talked about what is in our control, right? The challenges that are in our control. And it's a little bit trickier when it comes to things that we might not have control over. So things like equitable access and parent involvement. So I know for Toronto District School Board, I'm not sure about other boards, but the TDSB does have their new device program, which is fantastic. And I've seen firsthand being in a school where the grade 5 students are getting their laptop and they just light up. So I have hope that it's gonna be great for them. But still, and over the last year and up to the beginning of this year, I've personally worked in classrooms where students' homes still don't have the best Wi-Fi, the most stable Wi-Fi. Providing care at home for students is or can be a tremendous challenge for some families. Last year, there were cases of students having to go to work with their families because they couldn't afford either not to work or to provide care. So for whatever the reasons are, being more equitable, being more accessible, having those accessible resources is still a work in progress with virtual teaching, but some things that educators can have control over, or at least a little bit of control, is or are consistent communication with parents and being open to communication with parents, trying to understand student needs and maybe even the atmosphere that they're learning from, and trying our best to meet and accommodate those needs. Which would bring us to our last point, considering mental health. And this goes for both students and educators. And again, I'd like to invite you to use the chat. If you are a virtual teacher or you did virtually teach in the past year or so, I would invite you to share one thing that you did for the betterment of your mental health. And again, it could be small, it could be big. So one small thing that I did when I was teaching last year is from home, I would just walk out into my garden during my breaks, whether it was sun, rain, wind, it didn't mind. I didn't care. I was going to get that breath of fresh air, right? So, and even having that space is such a huge privilege. So a lot of our students might be learning from apartment buildings or from different home settings, right? So if you could share one thing that you did or are doing for the betterment of your mental health while virtually teaching, I'm sure everyone here would appreciate that knowledge. And ultimately, we want to create classrooms where students feel safe and successful, but educators also need to nurture their well-being in order to bring that well-being into their classrooms, right? And ensure that students have the tools and strategies to prioritize their own well-being. And so again, the interactive strategies in this book are really helpful for fostering those communities of care, of kindness, of understanding, and inclusivity, right? And so I guess I'd just like to end by saying, whether you're teaching online or in person, or maybe you're not teaching, we are in a time of huge shifts to the way that we do things. And like I tell my students as their supply teacher, change is hard. And my personal idea for this book is, or my hope for this book is that it helps support you through those changes and frees up time, space, and energy for you to do what you do best. And I just want to say a sincere thanks to all of the educators here and out there for the work that you do. And you got this. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you for highlighting community and that sense of trust that's needed. That was a nice framework to consider that. It's obvious that there's going to be lots of research. It's happening already, but the articles are starting to be written. There's children's literature now about being stuck inside over the past 18 or 20 months, whatever the time period is. But there is lots of research. And in our book, we wanted to hear from teachers. So we have a section, and we asked lots of teachers, when teaching online, remember, it's all about the pedagogy, not the technology. How you teach is more important. So our own beliefs and assumptions come through, and technology is just the tool. And Dawn, who I believe is on screen in our community today, she said, "You're learning, the students are learning. Expect to learn as much from them as they are learning from you." And Dawn wrote a beautiful piece, a brilliant piece about her journey moving from from A to Z, about how her learning happened, and she did some exciting things, and she talks about that in an interview. But always reminding us that we're learning along with the students. Learning was huge for me. On a positive note, I got to build better relationships with my colleagues. So again, we can look beyond just the classroom interaction with our students, but the professional learning that happened amongst students. So teacher voices, this is just represents a few that we gathered. And then we asked the students, Lionel? My advice to teachers about online learning is to keep using games and have fun stuff. I like when we can do creative things. I like when I can laugh with my friends. And Gavin, grade 4 student, online learning has helped me become more patient and more independent. So reflecting on the learning there. Advice to teachers, a secondary school student, please don't lecture so much. We learn better by interacting with each other. And that could have been the theme from the book and put on the cover or the back cover as well. But the complaints that we did get from kids, if they complained, was they say the teacher talked too much. And I think that's just, it's not a judgment. I think it's a comfort level with teachers and listening to the kids to see how we can expand our repertoire. Very briefly then, Lionel, we took, when Debbie and I had all our strategies arranged, a whole carousel of strategies. How did we organize them? So our chapters, chapter 1 is Let's Play, where we do build that community. And we took our very favorite games and decided to put them in print of how they can be played virtually. These came from classroom experiences into virtual experiences and can go back to the face-to-face experience. So that the value of play. Communicate, how do we invite kids to share what's going on inside their head? So the strategies in this one: invite communication, invite breakout rooms, invite raising the hands so we can find out how they respond to a theme or a text or a content that you're presenting. And again, Debbie and I brought our drama world to this, and role playing is in there. So let's role play. Brings the drama world and the imagined experience there. The world story has been part of our teaching. So we have activities. There's about 8 in each chapter. Some have 7, some have 10. We'll see what the final book comes out in terms of editing. But the storytelling activities and the number one community building activity for me is when kids tell stories. So in my first class with my adults, we told stories about their names. We told stories in my other class about favorite books from their childhood. Stories really brings community together. Let's present. How can we present on screen? How can we invite the kids to present their ideas? So Reader's Theater is an example. When they work with minimal scripts, when they present their stories and present their technological projects. And that leads to Let's Innovate. Let's Innovate. We looked at the world of technology and we asked teachers, how did you use technologies to bring in immediate learning for what's happening in the world of technology? So you've got things like Pixton and you've got other activities. We're going to talk about them. So the innovation. And Debbie and I felt it was important to let's reflect. And we have self-assessment, teacher assessment to help them think about their learning in these kinds of experiences. There's an overview of the chapters. And the next slide shows you what's in each chapter. So we describe what is it. So what is the activity? Then we have a demonstration lesson. We invite through the step-by-step instruction how to teach this virtually, what platforms to use, what are some alternatives to the platforms. So we demonstrate, after defining what it is, we demonstrate the how to do it. Teaching tips, helps teachers to consider some challenges that they might have and how they can extend the learning as well, which leads to let's go further. After you've done this activity, I was going to say play a game, which is part of it. How can we extend the learning? So we have 2 or 3 in each event, each strategy, to show you how you can deepen the learning. And that's why we kind of like the word deepening. We worked hard at that word. I absolutely applaud the guest voices. I looked at teachers. I mentioned Dawn earlier. I'm not sure if my niece is on the screen or in their community today, but my nieces, both teachers, wrote for us. And I was very lucky because I was supervising student teachers. And one student got very excited about talking. Larry, I taught dance to grade 3s. And I said, could you write that up for us? And teachers talked about how they use Flipgrid. So that brought a sense of authenticity. And it came from students and colleagues to talk. And my colleagues at OISE as well contributed to guest voices. And throughout the book, I think there's 20 reproducible masters that you are practical. We used to call them the handouts, but you can use them online or in class. There's that variation. So that's the overview of the chapters. And before I introduce Debbie, here are some sample strategies from different chapters. That's Me is one that I played 6 times last week. I had 6 Zoom classes, and that's me. If I was in the classroom, I'd be in a circle. On the screen, put up your hand if you've been to Tim Hortons. Put up your hand if you have an older brother. Put up your hand if you've read all the Harry Potter books. So it was an inclusive activities where these students were getting to know each other, and I was getting to know them. So that a game that I've automatically played in my first drama class for the last few years certainly worked online. This is a pencil I've been playing for the last 40 years. It's been in my first drama book, and it was a great one to introduce imagination. It was my first drama activity with my students last week. This is a pencil. It's not really a pencil. And we did a mime activity to show me that it was a toothbrush, that it was a violin, that it was a baseball bat. And I gave them permission to go on mute because they were communicating non-verbally. And this is a pencil. Class meetings is really, really important, particularly in the virtual, because you can give them a hot topic to talk about, or you can introduce a literature selection. But those class meetings are vital. Readers Theater, we have a couple of examples, and there's a reproducible of a fable, and how would the kids work to present that? And if they've rehearsed their different parts using the script, they can present that piece of Readers Theater. And digital storytelling is a project that my students did. It's not new, but they each had to take a novel that they were reading or a picture book, and they had to become the character in the novel or the picture book. One group did novels, one group did picture books, and they had to present that as a digital story. So not a new activity, but it certainly worked because they can take the work that they're using in technology, and that is they did an amazing job. And I'm going to put that in. I put it, I think, in nearly every course because the students. It really connected literacy and the arts and technology. So there's a handful of strategies that you will meet throughout the book. And my friend Debbie is going to introduce some other practical strategies that come from Let's Imagine and Let's Move. Debbie.
Here I am. Am I up there?
You're there.
Hi. Okay, so just hello to everybody out there, and thank you for tuning in. And I hope I've met you face to face at some point, or get to meet you face to face at some point in the future. So Let's Imagine is part of is the first activity in the role-playing chapter. And the word let's over and over again for me is really important because I see all of this as invitations to the students to engage, to participate, to share, to interact, all of that. And so Let's Imagine is an invitation to imagine. And like a lot of the chapters, the activities are really scaffolded. So in this activity, we start pretty simple. And if you are out there and you would like to record and imagine yourself, write down who you'd be if you were a number, a musical instrument, etc. So you have a sense of how your kids would experience it. So the first ones are very simple, and then we move into more complex, like if I were endowed with a special power, it would be. And then that role is an invitation to kids to really start to think about, if I had a special power, if I had this other part of me. So to step into the role of someone with a special power and begin to think about the implications of that. So would I be the same? Would I be different? Would people respond to me differently? Would it be a secret? And then Larry talked a little bit about let's go further. So in the let's go further part, there would be opportunities for kids to really deepen their understanding of that, and then make some connections to how is a special power part of who you are, and how people see you in the real world as well as in the imaginary. So that's let's imagine. And then the other role-playing activity, we're at movement map now? Okay. So the other chapters that I'm going to talk about is let's move. And I think Magdalin and Larry have both talked about how, especially for kids sitting in front of a screen, it is so important for them to be able to get up and move and, change the space that they're in, if that's at all possible, if they're working in a room that has some space for them to actually move in it. And in this activity, kids create a movement map, and then they get up on their own and actually move to those symbols and move in a way that those symbols are represented. And I have a grandson who was online for grade 1, and he had a wonderful teacher, and they did lots of movement activities. And one thing they did were these brain breaks. And he said that was a really, really fun part of the day. And when the brain break moment came on, everybody else in the house took advantage of having a brain break and got up and danced with him or moved with him or whatever the brain break consisted of. So it was really a fun and important moment. And then he could return to the screen and focus again on that kind of online virtual moment. And kids can move and they can watch each other on the screen or not, lots of different ways. And there's lots of movement activities in that chapter. And the next slide is minimal scripts. So minimal scripts are in the role play chapter, but later on in the Let's Present chapter, there are more developed scripts. But minimal scripts are really just snippets of dialogue without any stage directions or any distinct characters. And so it really opens up a whole opportunity to interpret those words up, who might be saying this, where might they be saying it, what might they be doing while they're saying it, etc. And Larry, were you going to do one of these with me?
I'll do one with you. I'll go on just a minute.
Needless to say, Larry and I have done a few minimal scripts together over the last.
Which one do you want to do, Debbie?
Oh, I think we should do I'll see you again.
Okay, you start.
I'll see you again.
Next week?
Perhaps.
Very well. I'm going to start now. I'll see you again.
Oh, next week.
Perhaps.
Very well.
You be angry. Same line. Debbie.
I'll see you again.
Next week?
Perhaps.
Very well. People pay hundreds for that workshop, folks. It's so much fun, and the kids have fun interpreting it. It's a great way to do drama. Debbie?
Okay, and so they could, in-person classes, they can change partners, they can, move around the room, they can do it while they're walking, while they're running. In the virtual classroom, they can still work together the way that Larry and I did. They can go off into breakout rooms and work on it. They can, try different ways. And when I was teaching drama, especially with intermediate and senior kids, they would always say, "Miss, where's my script? Where's my script? When are we going to get our scripts?" Because somehow they think drama is about the play. So minimal scripts are a really good way to begin. And then, as I said, in the Let's Present chapter, there is a more detailed script. There's an actual scene from a play that is really very appropriate for junior intermediate kids. And there are lots of strategies to help the students explore and deepen their understanding so that if they do want to present, they can be really successful having gone through this kind of exploration. So I hope you'll look at that. And just one other thing I want to say was all of these strategies are really, really useful on their own. But, and we give you lots of examples about how you might use them in your classrooms. But I would really encourage you to also think about adapting them to the context that you're working in. So, write some minimal scripts that maybe could introduce a particular piece of literature or pull dialogue out of a story they're going to read or a novel they're going to read as a way to introduce it. Or partway through the context and you really feel that they need to get up and do something, try one of the movement activities. So, hopefully you'll find ways to embed these activities into the work you're doing. Okay.
Thank you, Debbie. Playing with you again. Great fun. Just to show you a couple of more slides before we wrap up, Lionel. This one, I'm not going to apologize. I think this is in every one of my books. And if you know any of Larry's books, but it served me well. And in my virtual drama class, the students, when I ask them to review the program, they say this is the one they will most of them, 90% says, I love the Tic Tac Toe activity. And so you can change the words up. Debbie talked about different contexts. But if you don't know this particular activity, a torn map, an empty well, a wild garden, a gold crown, a wish tree, an ancient bridge, a black feather, a rusty key, a full moon. And the challenge is for the kids to imagine they're playing tic-tac-toe and choose any three. So if you were doing the horizontal line, it might be a torn map, an empty well, or wild garden. Or it might be a black feather, rusty key, or full moon. Or you might do one of the diagonals, a wild garden, a wish tree, and black feather. So choose 3 items, invent a story, and then meet in groups. So they do it independently to think of a story. Then they work in groups and they share their stories and why they chose those 3 words. And then to deepen the learning, to move it further, the group has to invent a story using those 3. And it can't just be a 1-sentence story, because I want to know who owned that key. I want to know if it opens doors or opens a chest. I want to know if it's valuable. I want to know who owned that key. So I'm not satisfied with 1-word sentence answers. And then to deepen it one more time, and this is where my students had fun, you have to dramatize the story, act out the story. It's fun to watch in a classroom to see adults go through play. It's fun to watch my students in a breakout room invent and collaborate together. And then, of course, they can write the story that they just invented. This activity has given me lots of mileage. And my students said, make sure you show that in your webinar, Larry. One more I have here. This is from a picture book. I think this is in the activity about questioning. So take an illustration or a painting or a photograph that you find intriguing, or the kids bring. Each kid can bring in a photograph or an illustration. And what are the questions that you have? What are the questions that you would ask about this woman? What is she looking at? Why are her hands up? What do you learn about her dress? So it's a brainstorming questions, and then we can only hypothesize and invent a story to go with those questions. And this comes from a beautiful picture book called The Brave Princess, Second Story Press. Kathy Kaser wrote this book, and it's actually the story of Prince Philip's, I'm going to say grandmother, who hid some, who was part of hiding some Jewish children during Nazi times. The Brave Prince is a beautiful book, but looking at a picture image is a great way to begin. To finish off then, throughout the book, we have checklists. For each chapter, we put a checklist at the beginning of the book for you to think about your own virtual teaching. So how comfortable are you at transforming face-to-face lessons in virtual context? And I can change the tense of that. How comfortable were you? How comfortable are you? Have you investigated new digital tools? Absolutely a learning curve for Uncle Larry. Do the students work independently? Do they work in small groups? Do they always meet? You got to have a balance of groupings. What opportunities for the arts-based experiences? And I think that's threaded throughout our book. And what are your expectations for students in going on mute or off video? How might you encourage meaningful participation? And so we can each have some strategies for that. But this comes from a list of about 20, but throughout the book, we help you reflect on your own practices with play, with story, etc. And just to finish off, I love this quote. It's a little bit lengthy, but when I was writing the book, this was in the New York Times. I'll read it to you. We must do more than physically return to schools. As important as that is to create the normalcy we crave. Oh my goodness, what's normalcy? So it has to be more than physical. We must also put in place the supports to help students recover socially, emotionally, and academically. And having been back in the classrooms for 3 weeks, for the majority of the students, isn't that really vital? That social interaction. And we must reimagine teaching and learning to focus on what sparks students' passion, nurtures critical thinking, and brings learning to life. So all children have access to the opportunities that give them freedom to thrive. I wish I said that quote, but it was great to choose that president of the American Federation of Teachers. And I think he's encapsulated not only where we are on September 2021, but it certainly summarized what our beliefs for this book to be. And we'll finish off with one last quotation. And we go to John Dewey. If we teach today as we taught yesterday, we rob our children of tomorrow. And I'm even thinking of when we began this book, the yesterday of this book, and when it's coming out, but it is about the tomorrows. If we teach today as we taught yesterday, we rob our children of tomorrow. Thank you for listening. So many thoughts are coming to my mind. And Lionel, I leave it to you to highlight some things from the chat room or finish off for us. Thank you.
Thanks, Larry. I'm going to try my camera on, and if it's a bit choppy, I'll just turn my camera off there. But we'll do that, and we'll just move that out, and there'll just be our cameras there. So good. Well, thank you very much for that. I was busy writing notes here. I forget who said it here. I was going to take a quote. Tara mentioned you were doing the Tic Tac Toe. What a great activity! And I said I had to agree with that. Right? It was already sort of the brains were sort of that be kind of interesting to try a certain way. But there's one thing you said in here that really caught me, and I think we all know this, but you because early on as you were talking, bring communities together. I think, is COVID one of these times where how do I want to say this? COVID maybe made us realize that a virtual community is a learning community, but I sort of got the since people were
Lionel,
scrambling,
Lionel,
things
can you go
fit.
off? Can you go off audio because you're blanking out?
Let's try, guys. I just have a
Yeah,
bad connection today, so let's
yeah.
try that. Is that any? Let's see if that's any bit better
Not
there.
that we
Then
don't
sorry
want to
about
see your face, but it's clearer now. Yeah.
that.
At that point,
Okay.
you just want to punctuate that point about COVID.
Yeah, that when we moved to virtual, it felt like everyone was scrambling to create a learning community, but no one. But you said stories bring communities together. Is that kind of one of the secrets that maybe we missed when we moved to the
Um,
virtual?
I'm going to be tough. I'll let anybody else answer as well. But when I asked a couple of kids too, to be fair, what do you like about your virtual experience? And a couple of kids, and I'm talking primary and junior, and actually an intermediate grade 7 student didn't want to go to school. She said, what do you like about it? Nothing. And my answer, and this is sort of tough, and yeah, I'm going to go off screen in a minute too, but I think good teaching is good teaching. And that was one of the things that we wanted. We tried to put that in our the introduction of the book. And again, I applaud every teacher who went through the experiences. I do mean that with sincerity. But there was the range then. But some teachers didn't want to take that risk. That last slide that I showed you from the president there of the association, I think we have to challenge ourselves. And that was our first slide too, to find new resources. And I absolutely was out of my comfort zone. But I rose to the occasion in some capacity, and I do keep it simple. I keep it simple both for me and the students, and they get fancier technology with other students. But I think that's something that brings us together. So find something that you believe in, whether it's movement, whether it's a brain break scavenger hunt. Find something that brings them together. Today, Magdalin did art. So art's a creative experience. And I think giving those kids alternative, and I think that would be the thrust and theme of our book. And I want to and finish off with that thought.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. But I have to ask because one of the strategies that came up was the let's imagine. And the very last one was you're endowed with a superpower. It would be, what's yours?
Me?
Yeah.
I want to be Lionel. No, I'm an old, and I long to be more technical. I'm getting better, but I wish I had the power to do. My printer wasn't working for 3 weeks, and I had to do course outlines. I get very frustrated by that, and we all have our frustrations. So I'm going to say I wish I was more. I applaud you and other colleagues who are great at it. I love when my student says, "Larry, push this button and go here." I wish I had that power, but I'm getting better. It's not a super.
That's great. I agree. I totally agree about getting better. Yeah. Ron had a quick question here, and I think it's a good one. He says, can you talk a little bit more about minimal scripts, please? When you and Debbie did your minimal script, I was totally like, whoa, I wasn't expecting what you did. So is there any more
Debbie,
you can give some more depth on that?
Debbie, we've done so many workshops of this. Debbie, why don't you give a chat and talk about minimal scripts?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So minimal scripts just are little fragments of dialogue that you can write or you can select from other text and then give it to the kids. And there's so many opportunities for them, for kids. It really does level the playing field in your classroom because every student can work with 2 lines. They might not be able to work with, a whole page, but they can work with 2 lines and they can bring their imagination to that. We can give them lots of ways of speaking, reading. We can change the lines around, and then we can have them write their own. So they can put lines together from a couple of scripts to make a bigger script and try to make meaning of the words in so many different ways. But lift the words off the page, which is really fun and exciting.
Yes, and Ron, what's exciting about it, I just want to add on, because Debbie and I have done this workshop. It's been something that we done because notice that they're neutral. We don't say boy, girl. We don't say the doctor and the nurse. They decide who the characters are, why they're saying them, and who and where they might be saying them, and then how they might be saying them. So they look at alternative meanings, and there's no wrong answer. I don't know why those people. Is it a doctor talking to patient? See you again next week, or is it the hairdresser talking to her client? Let the kids improvise that. And two last things, Ron, is in the world of drama, it's interpretation. You've got the words on the page, and Debbie said we're going to lift them, but we want to improvise, and so the kids can improvise. And a great extension in a workshop is we have the kids add lines on and create their own scripts, which they can then present. That's minimal scripts in a nutshell. We love doing it.
That's great. Well, thank you. Thank you for that. I think Larry, we've come to the end here. So I don't know if there's any final thoughts you have for the group.
I just want to know if there was any more about in the chat room. I see Tara O'Neill. She talked about motivation and emotions are so different this year compared to previous years. Isn't that interesting? How can we look at emotions and we look at mental health? That's why I say there's going to be a lot of research done on it. And Tara brought up a very strong point about that as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's and I was one of what was number 5 on sort of things that Magdalin was talking about is as teachers mental health, and I wrote down the one brain break.
Yeah,
I thought that's an interest. Just the label is enough of a reminder, right?
Well, here's a little secret too. We did have brain breaks, and it took up about 2 pages, and our editor said, I think we got to reduce this. I said, the only reason I'm going to buy this book is for our 20 suggestions for brain breaks. So we compromised, and because it's a very practical way, and teachers we could do a whole list of them from talking to teachers. The scavenger hunt is a favorite, and that's great. It is 8:00, and if you are in the Toronto area, there's a Blue Jay games on. So we really thank you for coming tonight. And the book is in preview if you go to the website at Pembroke, and there's also a discount until the book comes out. You get a reduction of the book. That's all that information is on the website. But we're very excited to have it come out any day now, because who knows what the teaching's going to be any day now. Thanks for listening, and thanks to my colleagues, Magdalin and Debbie, and Lionel, you are a star. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. And maybe I can just wrap up with Susan's comment in the chat, where she said, congrats on the book. Grateful you've written this, especially for beginning teachers who are could be heading into virtual classrooms. That's me.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Everyone.
Cheers. Cheers.